Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let your imagination drift across the cold wind of the Central Asian steppe, a sea of grass stretching endlessly beneath a sky so vast that it feels like the dome of another world, a place where the horizon is a shifting line of mirage, and the earth carries the memory of countless hoofbeats, a place where survival is a struggle, where clans fight for grazing land, and where families move with the rhythm of nature rather than the certainty of cities. It is here, in this wild world, that a child named Temujin is born, a child who will carry within him not a prophecy, not a divine blessing, but the raw scars of hardship, abandonment, hunger, and exile, and through these wounds he will forge an iron will powerful enough to unite a fractured people and reshape the world, not with gentle persuasion, but with the fierce clarity of purpose that only someone forged in suffering can possess. And as you drift slowly into the story, allow the landscape to envelop you, the soft whisper of grass brushing against your thoughts, the distant rumble of thunder echoing like drums, the faint scent of horsehair and smoke rising from felt tents called jairs, where families sit in circles around the fire, telling stories of ancestors, heroes, spirits, and the eternal blue sky, the sky that watches over everything without judgment, the same sky Temujin watched as a boy when his father, Yasuji, a proud tribal leader, was poisoned by rivals, leaving his family alone and powerless, cast out by their clan, their status stripped away in an instant, and so Temujin, barely a child, learned the nature of power not from luxury, but from betrayal, the way authority can vanish when you have no one to defend you, the way loyalty can be a thin thread holding everything together, and how quickly it snaps when threatened. And as you relax into this unfolding journey, imagine the cold nights when Temujin hunted for roots to feed his starving siblings, when he learned to read the steppe like a language, the movement of birds revealing coming storms, the change in the wind hinting at danger, the tracks of animals offering food or threat, and in that silence, the boy developed a rare kind of patience, the ability to wait, to endure, to observe, a trait that would later define the greatest military mind of his age, a mind that understood not only battle, but the people who fought in it, their fears, their ambitions, and their need for unity in a land where every tribe was its own small world, and yet, this world was always in conflict, blood feuds lasting generations, alliances shifting like dust in the wind, and into that chaos Temujin would one day step with a vision that seemed impossible, not just to survive, but to unite, not just to lead, but to create something larger than any tribe had ever dreamed of, a nation of nations, bound not by ancestry, but by loyalty and law, a living empire that moved as one, like a single mind across the plains. And as you sink deeper into the story, feel the calm rhythm of a horse's gait beneath you, steady and hypnotic, the way riders traveled for days without speaking, communicating through glances, gestures, the bond between man and animal forming a kind of meditation. And it is in this world of quiet endurance that Temujin's character is shaped, not by luxury, not by scholarly education, but by the necessity of survival, from captivity under rival clans, to daring escapes under cover of darkness, each experience carving away weakness and leaving behind a leader shaped by real life, not legend, a leader who would learn that mercy can earn loyalty faster than fear, but fear can crush armies when used like a blade. And as your breathing slows, consider how unlikely it all was, that from a forgotten valley, a boy without a tribe would rise to become Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, commanding armies that crossed deserts, mountains, and cities so distant that his own people had no names for them. And yet, his story is not just one of conquest, but of revolution, revolution in ideas, in laws, in the way power flowed from the bottom upward, rewarding talent rather than birth. And this is the true heart of his journey, the transformation of fragmented tribes into a single identity, the Mongol nation, built not on bloodline privilege, but on a shared oath beneath the eternal blue sky. And so, as you drift towards sleep, the wind of the steppe curls around your thoughts, carrying with it the first seeds of the story, the earliest moments of a life that would bend the arc of history, turning a nameless child into a force that reshaped continents, opened trade routes, spread ideas, transformed warfare, and left behind a legacy still woven into the modern world. And now, with the horizon still whispering the promise of destiny, the journey begins. The beginning of the movement that would one day transform Temujin into Genghis Khan did not start with an army, a banner, or a declaration, but instead with the slow, almost invisible gathering of friendships, alliances, and promises made in the shadows of hardship. And it grew like fire in dry grass, quietly spreading until the land itself seemed to breathe with the possibility of unity. And to understand this turning of fate, you must picture the young Temujin, no longer a starving child, but a determined adolescent who learned quickly that survival in the steppe was not only about strength of arms, but strength of relationships, and so he began to seek people who shared more than blood, people who believed in loyalty, fairness, and the idea that a leader should protect his followers like a father protects his children. And one of the most important figures in this early journey was Jamuka, his childhood friend, who shared with Temujin the bond of Andas, sworn brothers, drinking the same milk and swearing eternal loyalty, a bond that, in time, would become both the foundation of his rise and the spark of a devastating conflict, for friendship among leaders was a delicate thing, sometimes stronger than steel, but sometimes fragile as ice beneath the spring thaw, and in these early days Temujin also found guidance from unlikely allies such as Togrul, the Khan of the Kharait, who recognized the young man's potential and offered support based on respect earned rather than family lineage, a rare thing in a world defined by hereditary power. And alongside these influential figures was the loyalty of his wife, Borte, whose capture by the Merkits and dramatic rescue led by Temujin and Togrul marked a symbolic turning point, for this was the moment when Temujin first tasted the fire of command, leading warriors not just for vengeance, but to uphold honor and reclaim what had been taken from him. And from this rescue came more than personal victory, it became a story whispered around campfires, a tale of a young leader who would not abandon those he loved. And such stories spread faster than any proclamation, drawing followers from clans tired of corruption, tired of leaders who acted like lords rather than protectors, and slowly, step by cautious step, Temujin began to build a new order within the chaos, promoting warriors based on talent rather than ancestry, giving positions of command to men who had proven themselves in hardship, men from humble birth who would otherwise spend their lives forgotten in the dust of tribal politics. And this revolutionary idea, rewarding merit rather than bloodline, was like a spark dropped into dry timber, because for generations the tribes had suffered under the rule of nobles who inherited power without earning loyalty, and Temujin's way promised something different, a world where a poor hunter could rise to become a commander, where loyalty could reshape destiny, and with every man he elevated, he sowed a seed of devotion that could not be bought, only earned. And as his followers grew, so did resistance, for the tribal lords, steeped in tradition, feared what he represented, a challenge to the ancient hierarchy, the erosion of their inherited authority, and so whispers became threats, alliances shifted like dunes in the desert wind, and Jamuka, who once shared milk with Temujin under the soft blue sky, now began to see him not as a brother, but as a rival, one who dared to elevate commoners above nobles, a sin in the eyes of the old order. And so the first conflicts began, not as grand battles, but as raids, ambushes, intense negotiations, each one revealing a deeper truth. Temujin had no intention of becoming just another tribal Khan, he was building something larger, something without precedent, and to his followers this vision felt like freedom, but to his enemies it felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. And during these early struggles, Temujin showed an understanding of psychology as much as warfare, granting amnesty to defeated enemies, absorbing them into his growing movement, offering a place for everyone under his protection, a policy that was shocking in a culture built on revenge. And this choice created a paradox, for every enemy he forgave became a warrior who might fight for him tomorrow, turning defeat into strength, and loyalty into an expanding circle. And gradually, the words Temujin and justice became linked in the whispers of shepherds and hunters, while the nobles spat the same name like a curse. And as the seasons passed and his influence spread across the steppe, Temujin called a Kurultai, a great council, where he presented his vision to the people themselves, speaking not through poetry or ornament, but direct language shaped by his own scars, promising to protect widows and orphans, to share spoils equally, to punish betrayal without prejudice, and to create laws that applied to every person under his authority, from the lowest herder to the highest commander. And this was the beginning of the movement, not a revolution of cities or books, but a revolution forged in fire, wind, blood, and belief, a revolution of ideas whispered into the night, carried by riders across endless plains, where each man who joined saw himself reflected in Temujin's struggle. And little by little, the tribes that once fought endlessly over grass and honor began to see a new possibility, a future without constant war, where the strength of many could be united under one banner, one oath spoken beneath the eternal blue sky. And as you drift deeper into the quiet rhythm of this story, the movement's roots become clear. It was born from hunger, sharpened by betrayal, sustained by loyalty, and shaped by a leader who sought not only power, but transformation. And now, far beyond the campfires of these early nights, destiny waits on the horizon, its silhouette faint like a distant mountain, but growing closer with every step Temujin takes toward becoming the universal ruler the world will one day call Genghis Khan. As the movement grew from a circle of loyal riders into a force capable of changing the balance of the steppe, the key figures around Temujin began to emerge, not as legends, but as ordinary men who proved themselves through loyalty, courage, and sacrifice, each carrying their own stories of hardship, and together forming the living backbone of the early Mongol army. And among them were the four pillars of Temujin's rising power, men who would become known as his hounds: Jeeb, Kublai, Subutai, and Jelm. Though their names would echo across continents in later years, they began as humble warriors, and their loyalty was not demanded, but earned through Temujin's unwavering sense of fairness, for each had been given a second chance, a place in a movement that valued ability over ancestry. But the darkness behind this rising constellation of loyalty was the growing rift between Temujin and his blood brother Jamuka, now a proud aristocrat who believed leadership belonged only to noble families born under the eternal blue sky, and he viewed Temujin's elevation of commoners as an unforgivable violation of tradition, seeing in it the seeds of chaos. And so Jamuka, with his noble followers, declared himself the rightful Khan, calling Temujin's camp a gathering of slaves, a bitter insult meant to break the bond they once shared. And with that declaration began the early struggles that would shape the destiny of the steppe, not battles fought between armies of foreigners, but civil war among people who once shared milk from the same bowl. And the tragedy of this conflict was woven into every clash, every ambush, every night spent waiting for dawn, uncertain which brotherhood would survive history. These early struggles came like storms breaking across the grasslands, sudden, violent, unpredictable, and each one revealed not only military tactics, but the psychological depth of Temujin's leadership. For when Jamuka captured some of Temujin's allies, he executed them through brutal punishment meant to instill fear, but the effect was the opposite, turning the fallen into martyrs and their families into devoted supporters of Temujin, who vowed that such cruelty would never be practiced under his banner. And so, where Jamuka ruled through terror and inherited privilege, Temujin ruled through loyalty and shared suffering, even distributing food to his warriors equally, taking no special portion for himself, a decision that shocked nobles but created unbreakable devotion among the common fighters. And in these early days, struggles were not always grand battles, but small moments of survival, like the time Jelm found Temujin critically wounded by an arrow and nursed him back to health by sucking poisoned blood from his wound, or the time Subutai, a blacksmith's son, used improvised tactics to outsmart a larger force, ensuring the safety of the camp. And each act of devotion became a brick in the foundation of Temujin's movement, not built from gold or stone, but from stories whispered around firelight, stories that warmed hearts during the long nights of uncertainty. Yet, the path to power was not a straight line, and Temujin faced not only Jamuka, but rival tribes who saw his vision as a threat to their traditions, among them the Taichi-Ud, who captured Temujin in his youth, binding him with wooden stocks and displaying him like a trophy, believing the boy who once starved on the steppe would break. But he escaped with the help of a sympathetic guard, a small act of kindness that would later earn that man's family protection for generations. And it was moments like this that shaped Temujin's belief that loyalty is a force stronger than blood, stronger than fear, stronger even than hatred. And he repaid loyalty with loyalty, never forgetting the smallest kindness, even as the world around him demanded brutality. And while these early struggles hardened Temujin's character, they also shaped the future of military organization, for he introduced a system based on tens, hundreds, and thousands, ensuring that every man knew his place, his commander, his brothers in battle, creating a machine of war where unity was more powerful than individual strength. And this structure ensured that even if one leader fell, the whole did not collapse, a concept that would later allow the Mongol Empire to survive the deaths of its greatest generals. During these years of conflict, alliances shifted like the wind across the plains, and Temujin learned the art of diplomacy, convincing tribes who once despised each other to unite against a common enemy, offering them not the empty promises of nobles, but real stakes in the future, land to graze, protection for their children, and laws that applied equally to all, laws later known as the Yasa, a code not written on parchment, but memorized and spoken like sacred scripture, promising justice in a land long forgotten by fairness. And slowly, the movement became not just Temujin's ambition, but the dream of thousands who had lived their lives under the weight of tribal conflict. And while Jamuka clung to the old world, Temujin built the new one, piece by piece, oath by oath, until the camps of the steppe began to feel the heartbeat of something larger than any tribe, but this transformation came at a cost, and Temujin lost men he loved, warriors who died before they could see the dream realized, and each loss carved deeper resolve into his heart, for he knew that the path to unity required sacrifice, not just of weapons, but of old beliefs, old customs, even old friendships, and so the struggle with Jamuka became a struggle for the soul of the steppe, an invisible war between the past and the future, and as Jamuka gathered nobles beneath his banner of entitlement, Temujin gathered the forgotten, the poor, the brave, creating an army whose loyalty was not bought with promises, but fused by shared hunger and shared hope, and gradually, his campfires multiplied across the horizon, each one glowing like a star, each one signaling the rise of a movement that refused to fade, and now, as the earth turned through seasons of blood and snow, destiny stood waiting for the moment when these struggles would reach a breaking point, a turning point that would crown Temujin not as a mere Khan of a single tribe, but as the universal ruler of all the Mongols. And as you breathe softly into the rhythm of this unfolding journey, the early struggles stretch into the darkness like a path disappearing among hills, leading toward a future born of hardship, skill, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that a family can become a tribe can become a nation, and a nation can become a force powerful enough to reshape the world beneath the eternal blue sky. The turning point in Temujin's long and turbulent journey came like the slow cresting of a wave, rising across years of conflict until it finally broke with a force that reshaped the destiny of the steppe. And this moment was not a single battle or a single victory, but a culmination of oaths, betrayals, alliances, and sacrifices woven together by the steady hand of a man who had learned, through hardship, that true power is not seized in an instant, but built piece by piece, like the bones of a gur rising under the wind. And to understand this turning point, imagine the vast grasslands under the open sky, where the tribes once scattered like stars in the night now began to draw closer, converging around a leader whose authority came not from noble birth, but from the loyalty of those who had bled beside him, and this loyalty was tested most fiercely in the final chapter of Temujin's struggle against Jamuka, his once beloved brother in spirit, now the champion of the old order, and the final confrontation between them was not just a contest of armies, but a contest of visions, one side fighting for a world bound by tradition and the privileges of the noble class, and the other fighting for a world shaped by merit, where leadership could be earned through courage rather than inherited through blood. And when Temujin's forces encircled Jamuka's camp, the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of history, for both men understood that only one path could survive, and though the battle was fierce, the outcome had already been written by the years of shifting loyalties and the momentum of change sweeping across the plains. And when Jamuka was captured, Temujin did something that shocked even his closest followers. He refused to shed the blood of the man who was once his brother, choosing instead to grant him an honorable death without pain, an act that showed the depth of Temujin's understanding of honor, mercy, and the tragic beauty of their broken bond. And this moment resonated through the hearts of every warrior who witnessed it, teaching them that even in victory, cruelty was not a mark of strength but a stain upon it. And from that day forward, the story of Temujin's mercy toward Jamuka became a lesson whispered across generations, a reminder that leadership forged in suffering can still carry compassion. With Jamuka's death, the last great barrier to unification vanished, and the tribes, once divided by centuries of blood feuds, came together at a grand Kurultai, a council held on the sacred land where the grass swayed like waves beneath the eternal blue sky. And it was there, in the year 1206, that Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title meaning universal ruler, not just of one tribe, but of all the Mongols. And the ceremony was both simple and profound, for the people who crowned him had seen his journey from exile to power, and their belief in him was rooted not in myth, but in lived experience. And as the elders recited blessings and the people raised their voices in unison, Genghis Khan stood not merely as a conqueror, but as the living symbol of a new world, a world where the children of hunters, shepherds, and blacksmiths could stand shoulder to shoulder with nobles, where old hierarchies dissolved beneath the weight of a shared vision, and where the laws of the steppe were rewritten with the ink of fairness, loyalty, and discipline, forming the foundation of the Yasa, an unwritten code that established justice in a land where endless war had once been the only rule. And as the new Khan gazed across the sea of faces gathered before him, he did not see tribes, he saw a nation, a single identity born from the ashes of conflict, bound by oaths rather than bloodline. But this turning point was not only political, it was spiritual, for the Mongols believed that the sky, Tingri, the eternal blue vault that covered the world, had granted Genghis Khan the right to rule, and this belief was not imposed through fear or superstition, but accepted with the simple truth that only a man favored by the sky could rise from nothing to unite a people so famously independent, and so this divine mandate became part of the fabric of the empire, giving every warrior the sense that their victories were not merely for wealth or territory, but for a destiny larger than themselves, and this belief created an army unlike any other, a unified force driven not only by discipline and mobility, but by a shared conviction that their leader's strength came from both earth and sky, and as this spiritual foundation took root, it transformed the Mongol identity into something expansive, something that reached beyond the boundaries of the steppe, and in this moment of unity, the seeds of empire were planted. The turning point also brought sweeping reforms, shaping society as much as the battlefield, and Genghis Khan established a postal system that stretched across thousands of miles, enabling information to flow faster than any army. He reorganized the military to ensure that no soldier was left behind, creating an unbreakable chain of responsibility, and he prohibited the sale of women into slavery, protected religious freedom, and opened trade routes that would later shape the Silk Road, showing that his vision extended far beyond war, encompassing a world connected by exchange, ideas, and mutual respect. And these reforms, though born on the steppe, contained the blueprint of a global empire, one that would stretch from the forests of Siberia to the gates of Europe, from the sands of Persia to the coastline of China. And though his armies had not yet begun their great expansions, the foundation that made those conquests possible was set here, at the turning point, where unity replaced chaos, discipline replaced fragmentation, and ambition found the structure it needed to reach beyond the horizon. As you slowly drift deeper into this story, the turning point shines like a moment suspended in time, when the wind seemed to pause, the grass stilled its whisper, and the blue sky watched in silence as a boy who had once scavenged for roots transformed into a ruler whose influence would one day ripple across continents, reshaping cultures, borders, economies, and the very flow of world history. And though his journey was far from over, though countless battles still lay ahead, and though his name would one day become both revered and feared, this moment, the moment he became Genghis Khan, stands as the heartbeat of the epic, the instant when the past fell away and the future opened wide, as endless and mysterious as the horizon stretching beneath the eternal blue sky. The peak of Genghis Khan's rise did not arrive as a single triumphant moment, but as a long unfolding wave of conquest, diplomacy, innovation, and hardship stretching across years and continents, a wave that began on the steppe and rolled outward across the world, reshaping kingdoms, trade routes, and the memory of entire civilizations, until the name Genghis Khan became both a fear and a legend, spoken with awe in distant markets and whispered in terror behind the walls of fortified cities. And to understand this peak, imagine the Mongol army as a living organism moving across the earth, thousands of riders marching with the precision of a single mind, their horses trained to travel vast distances on little rest, their tactics honed through lifelong survival in the harshest environment imaginable, and at the center of it all sat Genghis Khan, no longer the exiled youth, but the leader of a united nation, a man whose decisions carried the weight of the steppe, a ruler who understood that the strength of his people did not lie merely in their swords, but in their adaptability, their discipline, and their belief in a destiny granted beneath the eternal blue sky. The first true test of this unified power was the campaign against the Jin dynasty of northern China, a wealthy empire protected by massive walls, fortified cities, and armies trained in the ancient arts of siege warfare. And yet, the Mongols, once dismissed as nomadic raiders, showed the world an unexpected mastery of logistics and innovation, building siege engines with the guidance of captured engineers, cutting supply lines with surgical efficiency, and using psychological tactics so precise that entire garrisons surrendered without a fight, for the Mongols understood that victory was not always won by numbers, but by breaking the will to resist, and city by city, strategy by strategy, they pushed deep into Jin territory, not simply conquering, but transforming the idea of warfare, proving that a mobile army of horse archers could adapt to siege battles without surrendering its core strengths. And during these campaigns, Genghis Khan maintained strict control over his forces, forbidding the unnecessary destruction of farmland needed to feed the newly conquered subjects, demanding that his soldiers respect merchants, artisans, and scholars who could contribute to the growing empire, and as these once fragmented Mongol tribes carved their path into one of the oldest civilizations in the world, they gathered knowledge, tools, languages, and customs, weaving them into the fabric of their expanding dominion. For unlike many conquerors, Genghis Khan did not seek to erase cultures, but to absorb their strengths into his own. Yet at the height of his power, challenges rose like shadows along the horizons of conquest, for success often brings not peace, but new wars, new enemies, new temptations, and one of the greatest challenges came from the Khwarezmian Empire, a kingdom stretching across Central Asia, rich with cities linked to the Silk Road, where caravans carried silk, spices, and precious metals between worlds, and Genghis Khan, seeing the value of trade over war, sent merchants and envoys to build a peaceful relationship, believing that diplomacy could achieve what conquest would only waste. But in a moment that would ignite one of the most devastating campaigns in history, the governor of Otrar betrayed the Mongol envoys, killing the merchants and seizing their goods, and when Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to demand justice, the Shah of Khwarezm insulted them and executed one of the emissaries, violating the sacred Mongol principle of diplomatic immunity, a crime that struck deeper than the loss of wealth, for to kill an envoy was to kill the possibility of peace, and the Mongols, bound by their code of honor, saw this as an unforgivable offense against the eternal blue sky. In response, Genghis Khan unleashed a strategic campaign that would become a lesson in military precision and ruthless justice, dividing his forces across vast distances to strike multiple cities at once, using speed as a weapon that defied the traditional logic of war, and as cities fell one after another, captured scholars and artisans were spared and integrated into the empire, while those who resisted faced consequences shaped by the Mongol laws of war. And though history remembers the destruction, it often forgets the complexity behind it. The Mongol army was a system of total mobilization, where scouts could travel 100 miles a day, where messages moved through the Yam postal relay faster than any kingdom had ever imagined, where commanders communicated across thousands of miles with signal fires, flags, and drum beats, creating a form of warfare that seemed supernatural to those who faced it, as if the Mongols could appear anywhere, at any time, their movements invisible until the thunder of hooves shook the earth beneath the walls. But even as the empire expanded beyond anything the steppe had ever dreamed, internal challenges pressed against Genghis Khan like winds testing the strength of a great tree, for uniting tribes in conquest was easier than maintaining unity in victory. And within the ranks, tensions sometimes rose between those born into the old aristocracy and those elevated through merit, while on the home front, questions grew about succession, about law, about the future of a nation now spread across immense distances, and so Genghis Khan worked tirelessly to build a structure that could survive beyond his own life, refining the Yasa into a network of rules governing everything from military discipline to the rights of women, who under Mongol law could own property, seek divorce, and serve as advisors, especially during times when the men rode to war. And he strengthened the empire's backbone by assigning leadership roles based not on family ties, but proven ability, placing trust in generals like Subutai, whose genius in planning multi-front campaigns would one day change the landscape of Europe, and in his sons, whom he trained not as princes, but as commanders who must earn the respect of the men they lead. In this time of greatness, Genghis Khan's nights were often spent not in celebration, but in contemplation, sitting beneath the sky he had revered since youth, asking the silent stars how a boy born into exile could now shoulder the fate of nations, asking how to hold together the spirits of warriors who came from so many different clans, cultures, and languages. And though frustration and doubt walked beside him like unseen companions, his determination remained unshaken, for he knew that an empire built only on conquest would die with its conqueror. But an empire built on laws, unity, and shared purpose could survive for generations. And so, as you drift deeper into the rhythm of this story, the peak of Genghis Khan's reign feels like a moment suspended in time, where success and struggle are intertwined like strands of horsehair in a bowstring, each one balancing the other, each one necessary to create the force that would launch arrows across continents, changing the course of history. And though the world remembers the thunder of hooves and the conquest of cities, the true peak of his power lay in the unseen work of shaping a nation without precedent, a nation born from nothing but the will of a man who believed that loyalty could transform the world beneath the eternal blue sky. The aftermath of Genghis Khan's extraordinary rise did not bring silence to the steppe, nor a fading of the force he had unleashed, but instead a widening circle of influence that continued to expand long after his final breath, like ripples spreading across the still surface of a lake, carrying the memory of the stone that had broken the water. And to understand this part of the story, imagine the aging Khan in his final years, no longer the youthful warrior who rode through night and storm guided only by instinct and ambition, but a leader who had seen the world beyond the horizon, who had watched his people transform from scattered clans into a single nation, who had spoken with scholars from distant lands, heard the prayers of priests, imams, and monks, learned the languages of conquered territories, and built a network of trade routes stretching across deserts and mountains that once seemed impassable. And though the years weighed upon him like a cloak of iron, Genghis Khan remained driven by purpose, knowing that even as his own life neared its end, the empire must survive beyond him, not as a monument to one man, but as a living system held together by law, loyalty, and shared destiny beneath the eternal blue sky. His death, shrouded in mystery and protected by legend, came in 1227 during the campaign against the Western Xia, a war born not from expansion, but from betrayal, for the Western Xia had broken their oath to the Mongols, refusing to provide support in the Khwarezmian campaign, and for Genghis Khan, whose life had been shaped by loyalty and oath-breaking, this betrayal could not remain unanswered, and so even in his final days, he rode against those who had broken the sacred bond of alliance, and when he died, his body was returned to the steppe in secrecy, buried in a place known only to a few, hidden from the world, returning to the earth that had shaped him, his grave unmarked, like the thousands of warriors who had fought beside him, for under Mongol tradition, the greatest honor was not the monument built of stone, but the memory carried in the hearts of the living, and the legends say that the soldiers who buried Genghis Khan killed anyone who crossed their path, ensuring that no enemy would ever disturb his rest, and that the horses trampled the ground until no trace of the burial remained, leaving the location swallowed by the endless grasslands that had witnessed his rise. But the end of the man was not the end of the movement, for the empire he built did not fall into chaos, but continued to expand with a momentum he had set in motion years before, guided by his sons and generals who had learned war and governance at his side, and among them, Ogdi, his chosen successor, became the next great Khan, ruling with a vision that combined the fierce pragmatism of his father with an understanding of the complexity of governing lands so vast that messages traveled for weeks along the relay stations of the Am, and under Ogdi and later Khans, the Mongol Empire reached its maximum expansion, pushing into the heart of Europe, where armies led by Subutai and Bata Khan crossed rivers in winter and shattered the armies of Poland and Hungary, advancing so swiftly that the courts of Europe trembled in uncertainty, and only the death of Ogdi halted the campaign, forcing the generals to return for the Kurultai, a moment that showed how deeply the empire valued the principles of leadership and consensus established by Genghis Khan, for even victory on the battlefield could not outweigh the responsibility of choosing a ruler beneath the eternal blue sky. To the east, the Mongols conquered the rest of the Jin dynasty and later the Song dynasty, laying the foundation for the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, who transformed China with reforms that influenced the world for centuries, bringing scholars, merchants, and engineers from foreign lands, supporting the spread of printing, medicine, and mathematics, and opening the Silk Road to unprecedented levels of international exchange. And through these networks, ideas traveled faster than armies, carrying knowledge between cultures that had once been separated by geography and war. And here lies one of the greatest impacts of Genghis Khan's legacy, the creation of a global system of connection, a bridge between the civilizations of Europe and Asia, where goods, languages, religions, and technologies crossed borders more freely than ever before, creating the first true age of international exchange, a world where a merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing, guided by the safety of the Pax Mongolica, protected by customs laws that guaranteed their property, food stations that fed travelers, and translators who could speak multiple languages across the empire. Yet the impact of Genghis Khan was not only material, but conceptual, for he introduced principles that challenged traditional notions of leadership, law, and society, creating a world where the merit of a warrior or official mattered more than noble blood, where women could hold influence in political decisions, where religious freedom was protected by decree, allowing Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and shamans to practice without fear, and where laws applied equally to all subjects, ensuring that even the sons of the Khan could be punished for crimes against the Asa, and such ideas, radical for their time, rippled through history, influencing governments and legal systems long after the Mongol Empire had fragmented, for though the empire eventually broke apart into separate khanates, each carried with it the imprint of the original vision shaped by a boy who had once suffered hunger beneath a cold sky. But the world often remembers only the clash of steel, the burned cities, the thunder of hooves, and the terror that swept across kingdoms as the Mongol armies advanced, and it is true that the expansion brought death and destruction on a scale rarely seen before, but to understand the full impact, one must look not only at the battlefield, but at the pathways open afterward, the flow of ideas that traveled through conquered territories, the end of isolation between East and West, and the creation of a shared economic network that gave birth to a new era of global interaction, and even centuries later, the genetic legacy of Genghis Khan touches millions of people across Asia, a symbol not of conquest alone, but of the deep interconnection his empire forged between long-divided peoples. As you breathe into the gentle rhythm of this story, imagine the steppe returning to its quiet after centuries of conflict, the wind moving through the grass like a familiar voice, whispering the memories of those who lived and died beneath the eternal blue sky. And though the Mongol Empire eventually fractured into four great khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty, the spirit of unity that once transformed tribes into a nation continued to echo in the hearts of those who remembered that a child born without a tribe had once united the world, and his legacy remains not only in the borders written on ancient maps, but in the way cultures learned to speak to one another, in the way ideas traveled between worlds that had once been separated by mountains, oceans, and fear. And so, the aftermath of Genghis Khan's journey is not the end of a story, but the beginning of a global one, a story that continues to unfold in the languages we speak, the routes we travel, the wisdom we share, and the belief that even the most unlikely person can change the course of history beneath the endless, eternal blue sky. Every journey, no matter how long, seeks a home, and every home, no matter how small, carries the weight of meaning. The Odyssey lives forever because it reflects the endless voyage of the human spirit. The legacy of Genghis Khan in the modern world is like a river buried beneath layers of earth, its waters still flowing quietly through the foundations of our global civilization, shaping landscapes that few recognize as having roots in the steppe. And to understand this invisible influence, you must imagine that the world before Genghis Khan was a constellation of isolated regions, each with its own culture, its own guarded borders, its own fears of the unknown beyond the horizon, and into that fragmented world came the Mongol Empire, not as a gentle force, but as a shock that broke those barriers, sometimes violently, yet afterward leaving a geography where trade could flow, where ideas could travel, where knowledge from one end of the continent could reach the other. And modern historians today acknowledge that the Mongols, feared in their time, inadvertently forged the earliest form of globalization, connecting Europe, Persia, India, and China into a network of exchange where scholars debated philosophy, merchants traded goods, and diplomats crossed borders under the protection of the Yasa, a set of laws that demanded respect for envoys, religious freedom, and the fair treatment of travelers, principles that centuries later would become embedded in international law. Even though most people today do not realize their roots lead back to a boy who once fled for his life across the frozen steppe. In the modern world, the image of Genghis Khan is often divided into extremes, seen either as a ruthless conqueror responsible for the destruction of cities and the death of millions, or as a visionary who united a world through systems that allowed cultures to speak to one another for the first time. And the truth lies somewhere between these two reflections, like a mirror cracked into many pieces, each shard offering a different view of the same face. For history is rarely a single story, but a tapestry woven from triumph and tragedy, and Genghis Khan's legacy is no different, carrying both the pain of conquest and the innovation that followed in its wake, the violence of expansion and the brilliance of the law that sustained the empire for generations, the grief of families lost to war and the prosperity brought by trade routes that reshaped economies forever. And this duality reflects the complexity of all great figures, whose actions can never be reduced to a single line in the pages of time. But beyond debate and perception, the legacy of Genghis Khan is written into the cultural DNA of entire regions. For the Mongols left behind more than empire, they planted ideas that took root long after their political power faded, and among those ideas was the belief that leadership should be based on merit rather than birth, a revolutionary concept in the 13th century, when Almost every kingdom on earth was ruled by families whose power was inherited rather than earned, and while the Mongol Empire eventually fragmented, the idea survived, influencing later governments that sought to elevate talent instead of bloodline, and though the connection may be distant, one can trace through history the echoes of Genghis Khan's meritocracy and systems of governance that value skill, education, and experience above aristocratic privilege, a subtle but powerful shift in the way civilizations began to think about leadership. Another enduring legacy lies in the Mongols' approach to cultural exchange, for unlike many conquerors who destroyed what they found, the Mongols often preserved and absorbed the knowledge of conquered peoples, bringing scholars, astronomers, physicians, and engineers to their courts, encouraging translations of texts from one language into another, and creating institutions where the discoveries of the Islamic Golden Age could reach China, and where Chinese innovations such as paper currency, gunpowder formulas, and navigational tools could reach Europe, accelerating the exchange of knowledge that would eventually help inspire technological revolutions, explorations, and scientific advancements centuries later. And although the empire that enabled this exchange collapsed, the pathways it opened remained, shaping the intellectual landscape of continents. In genetics, the legacy of Genghis Khan reveals itself in a more intimate way. Through a genetic footprint carried by millions of people across Asia, a reminder that empire is not only written in buildings and laws, but in the bloodlines formed through marriage, alliances, and generations of integration among different cultures. And though this genetic legacy does not carry the same symbolism as his military and administrative achievements, it reflects how deeply the Mongol expansion intertwined the destinies of people once separated by distance and war, reshaping populations and blending cultures into new identities that still exist today, especially across Central Asia, where the memory of Genghis Khan remains not merely historical, but personal, passed down through oral traditions, songs, and family stories. In Mongolia itself, the legacy of Genghis Khan has experienced a revival in the modern era, after decades of suppression under foreign influence and political upheaval, and today, statues, monuments, and national symbols carry his name as a reminder of the identity rooted in the steppe, of the pride of a nation whose ancestors rode as one beneath the eternal blue sky, of the resilience of a culture that survived empire, colonization, and the shifting tides of history. And across the world, scholars continue to rediscover the administrative genius of the Yasa, the strategic brilliance of Mongol warfare, and the innovative systems of communication that made it possible for messages to travel thousands of miles through the Yam relay system. Centuries before the invention of postal networks that define modern states, even in international diplomacy, traces of the Mongol worldview remain, for the idea that envoys are sacred and must not be harmed, a law enforced by the Mongols with strict discipline, has become a universal principle embodied in treaties and diplomatic protections recognized today. And while few would think to link these standards to the steppe, they are echoes of a time when Genghis Khan punished the killing of messengers with the full force of his armies, recognizing that communication between worlds depends not on trust alone, but on inviolable laws that safeguard dialogue even in times of conflict. But perhaps the most profound modern legacy of Genghis Khan is the reminder of what is possible when a person's destiny is shaped by will rather than circumstance, for his story remains one of the most powerful examples of human resilience, illustrating that greatness can emerge from the darkest circumstances, that unity can be forged from fragmentation, that leadership can be earned through loyalty rather than inherited through privilege. And his life reflects the paradox of history, where the most transformative individuals are often the most controversial, their impact measured not only in the lives they touched, but in the immense shadow they cast across generations, shaping worlds long after their bodies have returned to the earth. As you drift deeper into this history, feel the wind of the steppe echoing into the world we live in today, whispering through the networks that connect nations, through the laws that protect diplomacy, through the traditions of merit-based leadership, through the pathways of trade that once flowed beneath Mongol banners. And as modern societies debate their own systems of governance, their own struggles for unity, their own methods of exchange, it is worth remembering that the global patterns we now take for granted, the movement of goods across continents, the coexistence of religions, the blending of cultures, were shaped, in part, by a movement that began with a hungry child searching for roots in frozen soil beneath the eternal blue sky. And so, the legacy of Genghis Khan in the modern world is not a shadow of conquest alone, but a quiet foundation beneath our shared civilization, still flowing, still shaping, still whispering across the earth like the wind through endless grass. Now, as we near the end of this journey in the world of the steppe fades gently into the quiet memory of history, let your mind drift across the vast grasslands one last time. To the quiet places where wind moves through the soil like a living spirit, whispering the names of ancestors the way leaves whisper through the branches of an ancient tree, and imagine the stars above the steppe in the deep stillness of night, a sky so wide it makes the heart feel small, yet connected to everything, the same sky beneath which Temujin was born, where he took his first steps as a child, hunted for roots and hunger, and dreamed of a life beyond the cruelty of exile, a life where no child would be abandoned, no family cast out, no tribe forced into war through the ambitions of others, and in these dreams lay the fragile beginnings of a revolution not in palaces and cities, but in the hearts of people who learned to believe in something larger than their own survival. And as the deep silence of this story settles around you, consider the path from that hungry child to the man the world remembers as Genghis Khan, not as a myth carved from stone, but as a human being shaped by hardship, betrayal, friendship, and love, for behind the thunder of hooves and the rise of an empire lies a very simple truth: the desire to belong, to protect, to lead, to create order in a world of chaos, and to give meaning to suffering through the creation of something enduring. Something that can stand long after a life has ended. Close your eyes and see the tents of the Mongol encampments glowing softly under moonlight, the warm breath of horses rising like mist into the cold air, the steady rhythm of hooves striking earth as riders return from distant lands carrying news of battles won, treaties forged, and roads open, roads that now carry merchants, maps, and stories instead of armies, roads that were once fields of war now transformed into pathways of knowledge and trade. And imagine Genghis Khan sitting alone outside his tent, surrounded by silence, his thoughts turning over the weight of what he has built, knowing that power is not simply the ability to conquer, but the responsibility to govern, to set in motion laws that bind people together through justice rather than fear, laws that protect the weak, laws that prevent the kind of betrayal that scarred him as a child. And the Yasa, though unwritten, became a living testament to this belief. A network of principles passed from mouth to ear, heart to heart, just as stories are shared around a fire. Long after armies have gone quiet, it is often stories, not swords, that endure, and in this way, the legacy of Genghis Khan became less about conquest and more about the invisible threads that tie civilizations together through time. Now let yourself drift back through the scenes of this journey, young Temujin alone on the steppe, the betrayal that left his family in ruin, the moment he found loyalty in unlikely places, the rescue of Borte, the blood oath with Jamuka that became a wound deeper than any arrow, the countless nights of planning, the endless rides through moonlit plains, the first Kurultai where he was raised on the shoulders of his people, the weight of the title Genghis Khan, a title that meant not king of one tribe, but ruler of all Mongols, entrusted with the destiny of a nation carved from hardship and belief. And then the battles that spread outward like the widening rings of a storm, the highly disciplined armies moving with precision across continents, the unexpected strength in siege warfare against cities that believed themselves unbreakable, the strategic brilliance that turned open plains into traps and mountains into roads, the relentless willingness to learn from conquered peoples, to bring foreign engineers, scholars, and diplomats into the empire, weaving an ever-expanding fabric of cultures that had once existed in isolation. Through war came destruction, but through what followed came contact, exchange, and transformation. Then picture the moment of his death, the quiet mystery that surrounds it, the mournful whisper of wind through trees that may still stand near his hidden resting place. His body returned to the soil of the steppe, to be reclaimed by the land that raised him, and above his unmarked grave the grass grows freely, because the Mongols believed that no monument was needed to honor a man whose monument is the world he changed. There, beneath the eternal blue sky, lies the end of a warrior's long path, where victory and loss, regret and pride all fade into the same horizon, leaving only the legacy carried forward by those who believe in the dream that began in a forgotten valley under starlight. And that legacy lived on not only through his sons and generals, but through the systems he created, systems that survived the fragmentation of empire and shaped the centuries that followed, influencing diplomacy, law, trade, military strategy, and the very idea that different cultures can coexist under shared rules rather than eternal war. As sleep approaches, think of the steppe not as a battlefield, but as a cradle of humanity's stories, a place where people survived through cooperation. Where clans moved with seasons, where children learned to ride before they could walk, where songs were braided into identity, and where the spirit of the land taught that nothing is permanent except the sky above, a lesson that guided Temujin's entire life. His story is not simply one of conquest, but of transformation, a transformation that took a land defined by endless tribal conflict and turned it into a unified society capable of speaking to the world beyond its borders, a society that accepted different religions, rewarded skill, and built networks of communication across unimaginable distances. And though his armies once brought fear into the hearts of kings and emperors, the world today carries many of his innovations without fear, unaware that we inherit the legacy of a man from the steppe each time we send messages across continents, each time laws protect the rights of envoys, each time cultures exchange ideas freely, and each time leadership is earned rather than inherited. Now, slowly breathe in and let the wind of the steppe fill your imagination, as if you are sitting beneath the same sky that Temujin once watched, the sky that inspired him to believe that fate is not fixed, that destiny can be shaped by will, that unity can be born from chaos, and that greatness can emerge from the humblest beginnings. Let the stars above the grasslands guide your thoughts deeper into rest, as if their distant light is whispering ancient wisdom from centuries past, that no empire lasts forever, but the ideas behind it can endure, that no leader is perfect, but their legacy can move the world, and that the story of Genghis Khan is ultimately the story of humanity's potential, the potential to cross boundaries, to build bridges between worlds, to reshape what seems impossible, and to turn suffering into strength. And as you drift into sleep, imagine the steppe fading into dawn, the sun rising over hills that stretch beyond sight, the sound of distant hooves growing softer, until only silence remains, and in that silence, the memory of a boy who became a legend beneath the eternal blue sky continues to ride forward, carried by the wind into the dreams of those who listen, where history and sleep become one, and the journey of Genghis Khan lives on, not only in the past, but in the quiet promise of the world we share today.